What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Now, I know there's a lot going on in the news as of late, and I know I still have yet to make my episode 6 review of The Amazing Digital Circus. By the way, great episode. Also got a bunch of theories that I want to work on about it too. But I figured I want to start making my latest tech video because Apple has just announced the date for its annual September keynote, the one where they talk about the latest iPhone that they launch every year. And this year, we're going to be getting the iPhone 17 lineup, which should be, depending on which model you're focused on, a more substantial upgrade in comparison to what we got last year in the iPhone 16 series. I know I've gotten a bunch of dislikes and a lot of hate for my iPhone 16 video last year because, me personally, when it was first announced, I really was not too impressed with the iPhone 16. There really wasn't anything super major that actually impressed me, or at least was worthy enough for an upgrade. Aside from, maybe a few minor camera improvements, and also Apple Intelligence, and, we all know how that one went. Apple Intelligence has been nothing but an absolute failure in its own right. But, especially with how Apple Intelligence went, how the rollout went, I wasn't really too impressed with the iPhone 16 lineup. And I made a video about it last year, and I got a lot of hate from it. And, sometimes here on the channel, you are going to hear unpopular opinions. I really don't give a fuck. But this time around with the iPhone 17, so far from what I'm hearing with the news, I am still not impressed, but at least it's a lot more palatable. And, at least there are big enough improvements. And, at least Apple is making an attempt to make the next generation different and more improved than the previous generation. More notably on their Air lineup, which will be replacing the plus-sized regular 17. That at least has a major design, although only has one camera, but at least it's something completely different. So far from what I'm seeing, from the difference between the 16 and the 17, design changes are, for the most part, minimal. I was expecting something a little bit more major than that. Taking inspiration from the Pixel lineup, where it's just 3 horizontal cameras lined up to one another. That was a design that I was looking forward to seeing, since the Pixel 9 had it, and even the current Pixel 10 has it. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the Pixel 9 Pro was at least one of my favorite designs from any smartphone, and I wanted Apple to take inspiration from that. They kind of did, but they also made it pretty much the same at the same time. Especially when you look at the regular 17, which looks exactly the same as the regular 16 from last year. If you just compare the two, they're pretty much the same phone. But to me, it's almost like the difference between the 15 Pro and the 16 Pro. The same exact design, but with a lot of improvements in the inside. A19 chip, faster RAM, it's got a better camera, stuff that, normally pro users care about. However, also, something that the average consumer doesn't really take seriously. Unless photography is something they really care about, which I know an increasing number of people are starting to care more about. Your pictures gotta look good. So the difference between the 16 and the 17 is sort of similar to the difference between the 15 Pro and the 16 Pro from last year. But not in terms of, the internals and brand new fancy colors, but the display and the screen itself is also changing as well. You're going from a 6.1-inch display to a 6.3-inch display. Same exact change that we saw between the 15 Pro and the 16 Pro. Larger display, thinner bezels. So screen is going to be slightly bigger without changing the form factor of the device. So old iPhone 16 cases, I would assume, should be able to fit this new iPhone 17. You don't have to get new cases. But there is one feature that the Pro iPhones have had since the iPhone 13 Pro that is going to be launching with the regular iPhone 17. In fact, all iPhones are now going to be able to have this feature. Enter ProMotion. 120Hz display. In layman's terms, the screen is faster. Instead of refreshing 60 times per second, 60 frames per second, it refreshes 120 frames per second. That also means that across all devices, we'll be getting always-on displays. Sound familiar? Now, the reason why ProMotion iPhones come with an always-on display is because they're able to change its refresh rate. That's what ProMotion is. It's a 120Hz display, but it can adjust itself to 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second, 24 frames per second, and sometimes it can even drop as low as 3 frames per second, which allows for the always-on display to work, so that way it isn't refreshing constantly. It's not fixed on a certain frame rate, it adjusts its frame rate, so it uses the lowest one possible for the always-on display to work. It's the same reason why certain Apple Watch models come with an always-on display, because it utilizes the same technology. Most iPhones, meanwhile, before the always-on display, it can only adjust to 60 frames per second, 60 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and 60 frames per second. Oh, and did I also forget 60 frames per second? So you see what I mean? So with all iPhone models finally getting this ProMotion technology, allows for all iPhones to have the always-on display. So you know what? That's a welcome change. So the 17 and the 16 aren't really too different from each other design-wise, but at least there are some major features and major improvements that kind of sort of justify its upgrade. At least, it's a half-assed attempt. The Pro models, at least they find their own ways to justify being upgraded. Now, like I said earlier, I wanted to see, a major enough redesign that takes inspiration from the Google Pixel from last year. Well, Apple is at least taking that approach with this year's Pro model, but the one pet peeve that I do have with it is the fact that they're still keeping that triangular bowling ball camera layout. The one that we've had since 2019, since the 11 Pro. I never really been a fan of that camera layout. I've always called it ugly, even when it first was launched back in 2019, because it was fucking hideous. It was hideous on the concept images, and even looking at it, it's still hideous to this day. And, I've heard a bunch of justifications that the reason why these cameras are arranged in that specific way is because, all the cameras are, equal distance from each other. Well, to be fair, they're not actually equal distance from each other, but yet I still hear this claim all the time. It has to do with zooming in and zooming out so that way it looks smooth and it doesn't look like, jungled up like in some certain Android phones. I think Apple may have originally tried to redesign the camera layout in this specific model, but opted instead to keep the same triangular camera layout that they've had for almost 6 years now, and only making a minor change by extending the square camera cutout and pushing it towards the opposite end of the device, turning it into a rectangle, moving the LiDAR sensor, flash, and microphone along with it. Now, I noticed a lot of people were calling this a redesign. This is not a redesign, at least what I think. Yes, there are some minor changes to the design of the 17 Pro, but the only major change that they're making of this design is extending the camera bump and moving all the cameras and microphones and sensors to the other end of the device. And there's a big reason for that. Well, in fact, there are multiple reasons for that. Number one is spatial video. Now, the way spatial video works, if you have an iPhone 15 Pro or later, your phone probably has spatial video. What it does and how it works is that it's 3D video, or pictures, that creates an immersive, lifelike experience by capturing depth and dimension, similar to how the human eye see. It's captured using advanced techniques on devices like the iPhone 15 Pro or all the 16 models, and it's played back on spatial computing devices such as the Apple Vision Pro or maybe even a Meta Quest. Normally it appears as a 2D image, but when you put on the headset, it looks 3D, and it's almost like you're already in that area. It's like you're reliving that experience, like a metaverse, so to speak. And that requires 2 cameras to be aligned vertically, because you're trying to mimic the human eyes. That's why when you try to record spatial videos or you try to take spatial pictures, iOS, the software will tell you, hey, you need to put your phone into landscape mode in order to record spatial videos or take spatial pictures, because that's how it's supposed to work. The 2 cameras are aligned in that position, so that way you can mimic the human eyes when recording these spatial videos. You can't do that with the Pixel camera layout. You cannot have 3 cameras arranged horizontally, otherwise it wouldn't work. At least 2 of those cameras have to be in that vertical position in order for you to get spatial video. So I can understand that being the reason why Apple is not messing with the camera layouts on the 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max, and why they're keeping the same design as the regular 17. 2 cameras have to be vertical for spatial video to work. Again, as much as I hate not seeing a major redesign on any of the 17s, with the exception of the 17 Air, which we will get into, I can understand why they're not changing anything. Now that explains why the cameras are still the same triangular layout on the Pro models, but why are the flash, microphone, and LiDAR scanner pushed and extended to the other end of the phone? Now this is where all the camera upgrades come to play. This is also another reason why the bowling ball stovetop layout still exists. Again, I've been following the news about the iPhone 17 Pro, and as rumored, the 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max will be getting major camera improvements, particularly on the telephoto lens. Now, since the 16 Pro, I think, 2 out of the 3 cameras were all 48 megapixel cameras. Apple started including a 48 megapixel camera on their iPhones since the 14 Pro, that being the main sensor. Since then, they have also included the same upgrades to the ultra-wide camera, which just last year got the 48 megapixel upgrade. Originally, it was a 12 megapixel sensor, now it's a 48 megapixel sensor, and that same upgrade will be coming to the telephoto lens, which has been stuck on 12 megapixels since the iPhone 7 Plus, so it's been a while. Now, because this is a 48 megapixel telephoto lens, it comes with a bunch of upgrades in terms of the zoom, as well as even the size of the sensor itself. The telephoto lens is rumored to be a 48 megapixel sensor with up to 8 times optical zoom. Let me repeat, 8 times optical zoom, compared to a 5 times optical zoom on both the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. Now, it's still yet to be determined if it's going to be available on both the Pro and Pro Max, although most sources indicate that both Pro sizes will be getting the same exact feature. The lens, in addition to being the usual tetraprism setup, can apparently move, allowing for continuous optical zoom at various focal lengths with a variable aperture. So on top of already having a much bigger sensor, with more megapixels, you also have more technology, a more advanced tetraprism setup that can also change aperture, and the lens itself can also move back and forth. Now, to my knowledge, this requires an assload of space, and there's not going to be any room for that even if you have a horizontally arranged camera like the Pixel series. And even with the current layout that we already have with the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max, there's just not enough room for any of these improvements. So what do? You extend the camera bump all the way to the other end of the phone and move all the components to that same end, allowing for more space for that super advanced telephoto camera. So you don't have to worry about lack of space, and you're able to pack all that technology without running out of room. And we've seen how this is done with some leaked images, so that is why the iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max looks the way it does, because the camera improvements that it's getting justifies the change. Speaking of which, across all the 17 devices, we will be getting an improved 24 megapixel camera on the front. Also, one final question before we move on to the Air. Do you guys like titanium? Well, if you answered yes to that question, too bad, because prepare to say goodbye to the short-lived titanium iPhones, because we're going back to aluminum. But hey, at least we're going to get some fancy new colors out of it. I especially like the orange 17 Pro. I've seen a few leaked pictures of that color, and so far, that coppery orange definitely is up there with my style. And blue is also coming back. I have a blue 15 Pro. Glad to see that color return since they got rid of it on the 16 Pro. Now, 17 and 17 Pro and Pro Max aside, I think the biggest iPhone that we're going to see in this lineup is the 17 Air. This is the one device that is completely new and unlike anything that we have ever seen before. Now, the 17 Air contains a lot of deal breakers that might, turn you away from wanting to pick up this one specific phone, but there are sacrifices that are being made to achieve something that incredibly thin. And by thin, we're talking 5.4 millimeters thin, which is, to record, I think, the thinnest device that Apple has ever made. So this thing is pretty fucking slim. This will be the device that will replace the plus-sized iPhone 17. It's not as big as the plus-sized iPhones that we used to get, but it's roughly around in between the Pro Max size and the regular size. Not too big, but also not too small. So 6.6-inch display. So now you have 3 categories: regular, pro, and super thin, hence the name Air. Now, from the design leaks that we've been seeing, this is one of the nicest looking iPhones in this lineup. Like, if you're the type of person who is asking for like a completely new design, I would just simply point to the iPhone 17 Air because it is a completely new design. It's literally unlike anything that Apple has ever made. You're talking about a ridiculously thin device. It's got all the same bells and whistles that the iPhone 17 series has. Faster chip, better camera. Sure, it's only one camera, but it's still rumored to be a pretty good one. 48 megapixels. I would say this is more basically like the iPhone 16e, but it's actually worth it. It has all the same characteristics that the 16e has, but it's also good enough to be worth the purchase. It even has the same Pro hardware that the 17 Pro is rumored to have, like the A19 Pro chip, and the same 12 gigs of RAM upgrade, as opposed to simply having 8 gigs of RAM. That's what I like to think of the iPhone 17 Air. An iPhone 16e with the latest hardware, the same hardware as the Pro models, but with a new design and a thin, slim form factor. It can still fit in your pants with no problem, just avoid bending issues. Now, there's a lot of pros to having a very thin iPhone, or a thin device in general, but there are a few cons. You cannot have an immense battery with a thin device. Rumor has it that the battery is going to be around 28 milliamp hours, which, in today's standard, pretty pathetic when you really think about it. But in order to have that thin of a device, it's just impossible for it to have a high-capacity battery. Now, I've mentioned this on my iPhone 16e video, that the 17 Air will be getting the same Apple C1 modem as the 16e. And Apple has consistently talked about how much of an improvement of battery life the C1 chip is, as opposed to maybe a Snapdragon modem, which is what the iPhones currently have. Compared to Snapdragon, it's more battery efficient, but it lacks the millimeter wave support for 5G, and it also underperforms in certain real-world network connections compared to the newer Snapdragon modems, which the 17 Pro models and the regular 17 will be getting. Power efficiency is what the C1 chip tends to aim at. And to be fair, with a device that is that thin, and you're pretty much limited on what you can do with the battery, power efficiency is the number one priority. This is not going to have like an underperformed version of the A18 chip, which the iPhone 16e has. This is going to have the exact same CPU, the exact same chip as the higher end 17 Pro and Pro Max. So the 17 Air, despite its thinness, is going to be such a powerful device. And with a small battery, because of how thin it is, you're going to have a lot of battery issues. So I can see efficiency is going to be such a big focus with this device. And thankfully, with the power efficiency features of the Apple C1, it might not be as powerful as the Snapdragon modems, the latest ones that the rest of the 17 lineup are going to be getting, but at least it's going to be significantly better when it comes to efficiency. I think the 17 Air is going to be the one that's stealing the show. Who's going to care about the regular 17 if it looks just like the 16? Yes, it's going to have a slightly bigger screen with the same form factor, have thinner bezels, and finally come with ProMotion. Yes, the Pro models this year is going to have a significantly better camera, but, hindsight is 2020. I don't think people are going to be really that interested in the newer 17 models besides the 17 Air. So that's why I think the 17 Air will be the more popular choice in this entire lineup. New design, only one camera, but it's got a lot of new things, including a brand new modem and a lot of brand new hardware, the same exact hardware that you're getting from the Pro models, maybe even cheaper than the Pros. So that's obviously a much better bang for your buck. Now, we're only a week until this event officially happens, so I reckon maybe the day before the event actually starts. I don't know if it's a Monday or a Tuesday. Hold on, let me check my calendar. And it is, in fact, on a Tuesday. So Monday, I should start recording and editing that what to expect video for the iPhone 17 lineup. Maybe sprinkle in other things that should be talked about in the event. Maybe new Apple Watches in there too. Or some other miscellaneous shit. So I don't know what I'm going to be doing there. So stay tuned for that. This is exactly the reason why you guys should subscribe, because I'm going to be bringing you guys all the inside scoop, all the final leaks and rumors on what to expect with this device. That should be coming Monday. That's when I'm supposed to record. Again, it's on a Tuesday, so day before the event. So subscribe to the channel so that way you don't miss out, and make sure you turn on those notifications so that way you'll be notified when a video comes out because, like I keep saying, I'm your newsman. Your news guy. I keep you up to date with what's going on in the world. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to hit that like button down below. And if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the little notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on all my social medias. Links are in the description below, including and especially to my ex, formerly known as Twitter, at Axiom, that is at AXY0M. I post memes, thoughts, updates, and everything else there. That's where I'm the most active on all my social media platforms, so y'all are missing out. And also, again, requests are there. I am also on Blue Sky. I'll leave that in the link in the description below as well. Share this video around with your friends, families, boyfriends, girlfriends, enemies, whomever. Definitely helps me out a lot, helps the video grow, and helps grow the channel if you were to share this video with whomever you know. So yeah, so far my thoughts on this phone, I'm kind of sort of like indifferent of it, but again, I will be getting a what to expect video around Monday, the Monday before the event. So make sure you stay tuned for that. I'll be sure to record that video for you guys. Again, there's a bunch of other shit that I have planned, a lot of current events that are going on. It's gonna be busy, so there's gonna be a lot of content for you guys, hopefully. Exactly the reason why you subscribe, so you don't miss out when that video comes out, and ring the bell for notifications, so that way you'll be notified when that video comes out. So again, like, subscribe, ring notifications, and until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, talk soon, you're awesome.